Hey guys, it's your boy 14 Fluffies here today with another episode of Card Wars. Today we are featuring two different trap hole normal traps, Bottomless trap hole and Trecherous trap hole. Both are seeing a lot of play as of right now thanks to cards like Trecherous Rafflesia, but which one is better? I truly wonder which one. So today I'm going to be discussing them and comparing them and to see which one is better. Let's start off with Bottomless trap hole. As we all should know by now, Bottomless trap hole is a normal trap card that says when your opponent summons a monsters with 1500 or more attack, destroy that monster or monsters with 1500 or more attack, and if you banish it. So, obviously, this card is very useful in this. I don't want to make an overgeneralization here, but obviously this card is really good. It's staple level good. It's very, very good against almost everything in the meta, for the most part, except maybe Phantom Knights. And Burning Abyss, just because of the fact that the Burning Abyss monsters are pretty small, and the Phantom Knight stuff is pretty small, and even if you Bottomless Break Sword, it still triggers, so yeah. But the thing is that it does not target, which is very important against things like the Cosmo ships. So it outs the Cosmo ships, and since it just banishes them outright, they will not be able to trigger. So yeah, I still say this card is very Pinnacle versus Cosmo, but yeah, it's always good to run it. So another thing is that compared to Trecherous Trap Hole right here, Bottomless Trap Hole is always live. It can just be used at any point in time as long as the activation requirements are met. And it's also really hard to play around Bottomless just because of the fact that, if you want to play this game and progress, I mean, for the most part, you need to establish ways of putting damage on board, which means you'd have to put some larger monsters on board, and obviously Bottomless stops that stuff. So yeah. And another thing is that since the card text states that it can be monster or monsters, it has a very high ceiling as far as stopping a summon. So if you guys don't remember back in the day of Klee, back when it was at relatively full force with 2 Scout and Towers, like if they would pendulum summon a large number of Kleefort monsters, and then if you had Bottomless, you just banish all of them. So yeah, it was a big blowout card back in that day, and it still is very good against pendulums. It's just that now that the stat line is varied up, and sometimes your opponent's going to be pendulum summoning smaller monsters sometimes, but it really just depends on the deck. Sometimes certain pendulum decks have built-in protection for their monsters, like Magispectors, Dynamist, stuff like that. But yeah, for the most part, this card is incredibly solid versus decks like Draco Pals and stuff like that. So yeah, but as far as one disadvantage is that it does have a limited range of cards it can cover. It has to have 1500 or more attack, and it is shut off by cards that prevent banishing. Stuff like Imperial Iron Wall, Artifact Lancia, stuff like that. So yeah, it's not perfect, but it's still incredibly solid. But yeah, that's enough about Bottomless. I mean, it's a really good card. But let's talk about Trecherous Trap Hole. Now, for Trecherous Trap Hole, it says, if you have no cards in your graveyard, target 2 monsters on the field and destroy them. So, first off, right off the bat, the fact is that it can hit pretty much any monster on the field that can be targeted. So, it does not have to be limited to a certain stat range like Bottomless Trap Hole. So, yeah. And the fact is that this card is incredibly well used with Rafflesia, even better than Bottomless, just because of the fact that, you can pretty much just use this card at any point in time as long as you don't have traps in your graveyard. So, yeah. And plus, no matter what you do, if you use it with Rafflesia, it's always a +1 if you're using it correctly. As long as you're destroying 2 monsters your opponent controls with Trecherous, you're going to go, it's a guaranteed +1. Whereas Bottomless has a higher ceiling for potential, Trecherous Trap Hole is much more consistent in its performance, if that makes any sense. But the thing about Trecherous Trap Hole that is a very big minus is the fact that you have to have no traps in your graveyard to activate it, so it could be dead pretty much after turn 1. So yeah, that's why I've never played it in any of my builds, but I picked one up just because. It has a much stricter activation requirement than Bottomless Trap Hole, just because there has to be 2 monsters on the field, but those 2 monsters could be 2 monsters you control, and you don't necessarily want to pop 2 monsters you control. If you're going to want to use it to the most optimal, you need to your opponent needs to put 2 monsters on the board. But yeah, which means that it's also easier to play around compared to Bottomless Trap Holes, just because your opponent could just sit on 1 monster and just be good. So yeah, as far as what I think is better, it's this is actually really difficult to say. I'm inclined to say Bottomless just because of the fact it's much more versatile than Trecherous. But at the same time, Trecherous is a much more consistent card than Bottomless. Bottomless is a higher ceiling, and Trecherous has a more consistent performance. However, Trecherous can be dead at times. Bottomless is always live. You know, there's a lot. They contrast so much. It was very hard for me to reach this conclusion, but I ultimately concluded that Bottomless Trap Hole was the superior trap hole normal trap, just because of the fact that it's always live and the fact that it can pretty much have an infinite ceiling for potential. I mean, it is a very old card, but it still has not lost any of the power that it has in the past. So that's my decision. Tell me what you guys think in the comments section, and make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.